summer school, what we normally do is we tell the story, and people get an opportunity to retell it. They retell either aspects of it or the whole story. And the I suppose the first one, there was a small group of seven, and there was a lot of tension in the group initially to decide how they were going to read, what retelling they were going to do, and how they were going to do it. And so at the end, what they actually came together at the end to do a mime. And they were, by the time they had come to decide what they were going to do, they actually chose one person to direct the mime, and they were all very happy that each of their individual inputs was had been taken into consideration. And the theme that they used was owning the shadow, that the dark side. And they saw the symbol of the shadow in the children of Lear as that of the wand that Aoife used to turn the children into swans. And in the mime, what they did was they demonstrated that they were no longer afraid of this wand, and they physically took it back and buried it in the earth where it could be transformed and reborn. For them, it represented the cycle of life, death, and rebirth, which presents itself, of course, over and over again in traditional lore, and one that informs us of the possibility of change and renewal. So that was one group's perspective. Another one was a dance, another group of seven, and they wanted to enact the sense of the calm after the storm, as distinct from the calm before the storm. So, and what they wanted to depict was that you can have harmony, even if it's for a short time. And even in adversity, it's possible to create a sense of community, a sense of belonging. And their dance was a very beautiful dance, and where they were all interacting with each other. And it was a very slow dance, but again, very, very positive. Then another group, they decided to retell the whole story, and the emphasis was on isolation and despair. And each of the individuals spoke, gave some example of feelings of despair and loneliness and isolation in again in their group, and talking about how the personal and the collective interchange. There was another group where it was an all-woman group, and they again were just they decided to associate with the images that were coming up in the story with what was happening, how they perceived what was happening in Ireland, and they started to talk very much about marital breakdown and the consequence for the children. And they also spoke about the high suicide rates, especially among young men, and how sometimes the world can be a bit upside down, where children take on parental roles which are not appropriate. And there was a sense again of that theme of abandonment and exile. And one of the women in the group, which was interesting, was a stepmother herself of three boys and a girl. And one of the men was he was a twin. So it's very interesting, what how people get attracted to these stories. And I mean, you can't. It just also makes you feel very humble in a sense of how little we do know about these things and the resonances. And then there were two other retellings, and one of them, one retelling got all the characters in the group in the story to talk to each other, and there was a big emphasis on the brothers, where they were trying to connect to their father, and he was distracted and preoccupied, and how and hadn't much time for them, and how this they were very distraught by this, and how Fanula was trying to keep an eye on them all the time, and so she had, in a sense, grown up before her time, and she was doing very much had doing the parenting role, not just the mother, but the mother and father, and they also, in that particular where they got the characters to talk to each other, um, Bob was saying how delighted he was that Lear was distracted, as it meant that he didn't bother him, and also uh, what came out of it was how Lear was blocked from grieving. He wasn't allowed to grieve his first wife. She was replaced by Eve. He wasn't allowed to grieve for his second wife, and Aoife replaced her. So there was that, highlighting the lack of grieving, or the, being allowed to grieve. Um, and again, associations with how daughters can be burdened with too much responsibility, and that in again, association with Ireland today, how many Irish men uh, can feel out of place, that they don't have a place, and particularly single fathers who don't have any rights legally. And then the last group, they again concentrated on the children and their abandonment. And a lot of the associations in that last group were around how the church and the state colluded and had these institutional abuse, not just um, the, where the mental institutions, mother and baby homes, and the institutions where children were sent for misdemeanors. So and what, how, why was that the case, and how cruel it was. So and I suppose the functions that came out were that the powerful leader Bob, and the father, and the disappointed, the father was kind of, the powerful leader was Bob, the father Lear, the disappointed woman Aoife, the responsible daughter Fanula, and the unguided young men or boys. And the actual functions, as understood by the participants, tended to be as follows: the social leader made rash decisions based on power rather than involvement. The father figure uh, allows affection to override genuine involvement. And Aoife, the disappointed woman, is ostracized and misunderstood. And Fanula is weighed down and given too much responsibility too soon, while the unguided young men remain lost, without a voice, and are very vulnerable. So um, the experiments also revealed like the timeless relevance of myth, and indeed its ability to touch, I know, our souls, I think, at a deep level. And even in a postmodern, post-enlightenment age, this story, it still connects. Listeners bring their own unique biographies to making sense and relevance of the story, and how the process of working with the story has many of the characteristics of what anthropologists call liminality, or the transformation stage in rites of passage of, of communitas. And so it actually brings you into that liminal place. And how the group process is a powerful, innovative way of working with myth and story. So I suppose the experiments brought the psychological, both individual and social perspectives to bear on the story. They also highlight the way in which the legend of the Swan children, through its variant, the Children of Lear, is both once upon a time and future material. And why is this so? Why is there a timeless and enduring appeal to the great stories of our culture? It is surely because we as human beings are storied. We are storied. We bring to any situation or story our own biographies. And it is in the interplay of my story and others' stories with our culture's stories that we are able to open up to the soul's depths. And this is our individual soul and our collective soul. And in doing so, we have the opportunity to live lives more inspired and enriched. And the payoff is more aesthetic than moral. It is also a sense of wonder. Segal adds that the myth is not a guide to living in a moral sense, but is certainly a guide to living in an enriched sense. So while the Children of Lear's story is not morality, is not moral instruction, it certainly is a narrative language with which we interact in the shared journey towards personal and collective meaning, as was so clearly evident in the experiments. So, interacting with myth and story is more about a journey, a process, than it is about a destination or content per se. We, as fellow travellers, can, in the interaction, work out both individually and collectively our own meanings and depths, and in doing so, add to the aesthetics of our own lives. And how poignant and how wise, how inviting the last sentence in the literary text, so beautifully brought to us by the author. And that is the fate of the Children of Lear so far. So far, not concluded, but open ended, an opportunity to move on, to make one's own of what happens next. Sinead?
Thank you very much, Ellen. Sorry.